Thomas Elridge seemed like the perfect father, quiet, reliable, and always ready with a polite smile. But when 13-year-old Kyle Sanders vanished without a trace, investigators uncovered a nightmare hidden beneath Thomas's ordinary life, and a secret he never meant for anyone to find. Thomas Elridge lived in the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's dog by name, but not much else. He blended in easily, a man in his late 40s, slightly balding, always seen wearing neutral colors and a faded ball cap. He kept to himself just enough to seem normal, and engaged just enough to be likable. Most people described him as the quiet father, someone who worked hard, paid his taxes, and didn't make trouble. He had 2 children, a daughter in high school and a younger son in middle school. His wife had passed away years earlier in a car accident, or at least that was what he told people. No one ever asked him many questions. Thomas worked at the local hardware store 6 days a week, arriving exactly at 7:45 a.m. and leaving promptly at 5 p.m. His schedule never changed. On Sundays, he attended church with his children, sitting in the same pew every week. He occasionally coached Little League and sometimes volunteered at the school carnival. His lawn was always cut, his trash bins rolled in before sundown, and his kids always looked neat and well-behaved. Nothing about him stood out. But if you watched closely, there were little things, details most people ignored. He never invited anyone into his home. Birthday parties for his children were always held at the park or a bowling alley, never at the house. He kept his curtains closed, even on sunny days. At night, the only light visible from the street was a dim glow from the kitchen, and only for a few minutes at a time. He was polite to neighbors, but conversations never lasted more than a few seconds. If someone lingered too long near his property, Thomas would appear at the door, watching silently. Still, no one suspected a thing. People chalked up his behavior to grief. Losing a wife so young had to change a man, so they gave him space. After all, he wasn't hurting anyone, at least not that they could see. Everything changed when Kyle Sanders went missing. Kyle was a 13-year-old boy, the son of a single mother who worked nights as a nurse. He had a habit of riding his bike through the wooded paths that ran along the edge of town, always returning before dark. One evening, he didn't come home. His mother called his friends, then the police. A search was launched the next morning. Thomas joined the search effort. He walked through the woods, flashlight in hand, asking if anyone needed help. He was seen comforting Kyle's mother at a community vigil. People praised him online, calling him a kind neighbor, a good man. But the search turned up nothing. For weeks, posters of Kyle's face hung on street corners and bulletin boards. Police followed dozens of leads, but all ended in dead ends. The town began to lose hope. And Thomas? He went right back to his routine. Same schedule, same smile, same quiet presence. But behind closed doors, something was already unraveling. 3 weeks after Kyle Sanders went missing, the town began to shift from hope to quiet despair. The posters started curling at the corners. Candles placed on the sidewalk near Kyle's home were blown out and never relit. People still talked about the case, but less frequently. The attention faded the way it always does in small towns until something new was found. It happened on a Sunday morning. A woman named Carol Whitmore was walking her dog along a trail through the woods about 2 miles from where Kyle was last seen. Her dog, a golden retriever named Max, started barking and pulling at the leash, leading her off the path toward a cluster of trees. At first, she thought it might be a dead animal, but as she moved closer, she noticed a rectangular patch of dirt that looked different, looser, uneven. Something had been disturbed there recently. Carol called the police, her voice shaking. Officers arrived within the hour and secured the area. Forensics brought shovels and evidence bags. They worked slowly, carefully, brushing the dirt away layer by layer. Then they hit fabric. It wasn't a body, but it was almost worse. A small blue backpack. Inside it was a broken flashlight, a juice box, and a crumpled notebook with Kyle Sanders' name written on the inside cover. Next to the bag was a bundled hoodie, stained dark with what tests would soon confirm was blood. A pair of sneakers lay a few inches away, half buried. One shoelace had been torn clean off. No bones were found, no body, but the scene was enough. The police now had a crime scene, and it was no longer a missing person case. It was officially a criminal investigation. The media swarmed the area. Helicopters hovered overhead. Reporters came from neighboring towns, interviewing everyone who had known Kyle. The police set up checkpoints, blocking roads leading in and out of the forest area. Suspicion began to spread like wildfire. People who had once felt safe walking the trails now avoided them entirely. Parents kept their kids indoors. Rumors filled the air. The police interviewed dozens of people again, this time with more pressure. They looked for inconsistencies in stories, asked about alibis, revisited timelines. When they arrived at Thomas Elridge's house for a second interview, he acted just as calm as before. He opened the door, nodded politely, and invited them in. His house was clean, well lit, and smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. He answered every question, just like he had the first time. He said he had been home the night Cal vanished, watching TV with his kids. They backed up his story. The officers thanked him and prepared to leave, satisfied for the moment. But one rookie officer, trailing behind the others, noticed something strange near the basement door. Faint, narrow scratch marks along the bottom of the frame deep enough to catch the light. It was probably nothing, he thought, just wear and tear. Still, something about them felt wrong. He took a photo and noted it in his report. It was the first real clue, and no one, not even Thomas, realized how much it would matter. The scratch marks on the basement door wouldn't leave the rookie officer's mind. They were too deliberate, too sharp, as if someone had clawed at the frame in panic. He mentioned it to the lead detective during the case review, and although it wasn't enough on its own to take action, it was flagged. Combined with Thomas Elridge's oddly spotless house and his insistence on staying calm, it created a thin shadow of suspicion. Detectives began a deeper background check. Thomas had no criminal record, no red flags on file, but the lead investigator requested a thermal scan of the house, just to rule out hidden compartments or unusual structures. It was a long shot, the kind of thing done more from gut instinct than hard evidence. The scan revealed an abnormal heat signature coming from behind a wall in the basement. It looked like there was more space behind that wall than the blueprints showed. A judge approved a search warrant the next day. When officers arrived, Thomas appeared at the door, dressed as usual in his faded cap and neutral-toned sweater. But this time, his smile was strained. He asked if they had found something new. They said nothing, just handed him the warrant and stepped inside. His children weren't home. They had been picked up by Child Protective Services early that morning as a precaution. As the team moved into the basement, Thomas remained upstairs, sitting silently at the kitchen table. The officers began scanning the room. At first glance, the basement was unremarkable: tools on hooks, old paint cans, gardening supplies. But when they reached the far wall, they found the source of the heat anomaly, a false panel, nailed into place and painted to match the rest of the room. They pried it loose. Behind the wall was a narrow corridor leading to a locked steel door with 3 heavy bolts. The space was cramped and smelled faintly of mildew. The door opened outward, and once the bolts were undone, what they saw made even the most seasoned detectives pause. The room was small, soundproofed, with foam along every surface. A bare mattress lay in the center of the floor. Chains and restraints hung from the walls. In one corner sat a steel freezer, the industrial kind used in butcher shops. Along the ceiling ran a small ventilation system, rigged with a fan to keep the space from becoming unbearable. They opened the freezer last. Inside, neatly arranged, were plastic wrap packages labeled with dates and initials. Some contained what looked like bone, others held preserved skin or hair. One bag held something unmistakable: Kyle Sanders' necklace, a handmade piece with blue beads and a silver charm. It had been missing from the search site, assumed lost in the forest. Back upstairs, Thomas had not moved. He stared at the floor, eyes blank, face expressionless. The officers didn't need to say a word. He knew they had found it, and still, he said nothing. The basement room quickly became the center of a full-scale forensic investigation. Officers sealed off the house, and crime scene tape went up around the perimeter. Over the next several days, specialists in protective suits moved in and out, collecting samples, documenting every inch, photographing and bagging evidence. The media circled like vultures, and the quiet town watched in stunned silence as Thomas Elridge's home was transformed into a scene from a nightmare. Inside the hidden room, investigators discovered more than just physical evidence. Tucked inside a loose brick near the mattress, one officer found a notebook worn, stained, and filled with dense, handwritten entries. The cover had no title. The first page began with a single sentence: Every life I took felt like cleaning a mirror. What followed was a detailed, horrifying account of Thomas's private world. The journal held records of at least 7 victims, each listed by a set of initials and a date. Some entries included crude drawings of faces or maps of where the victims were taken. Others were disturbing reflections how he chose them, what he did, and why he believed they belonged to him. The tone was cold, methodical, and without remorse. The earliest date went back to 1999. The names didn't match any recent missing persons reports. That detail disturbed the lead detectives more than anything else. These victims weren't being actively looked for. When they cross-referenced the initials with cold cases in nearby counties, a pattern emerged: young runaways, kids from broken homes, children whose disappearances had never made the news. Most had been filed and forgotten. Thomas had targeted the invisible ones. He picked children no one would come searching for. He watched, waited, and acted only when he knew he could erase them without a trace. In his journal, he wrote about how easy it was to stay hidden behind a smile. He described his role as a father as a perfect disguise. His children, he claimed, kept the suspicion away. It soon became clear that the room had not just been used recently, it had been in operation for over 2 decades. Forensics found signs of renovations over the years. Different layers of paint, varied types of soundproofing, and even modifications to the door's locking system revealed how the space had evolved to suit his needs. He had adapted, improved, and refined his methods. The community was in shock. People who had once spoken highly of Thomas now felt betrayed, terrified, and confused. Parents who had let their children play at the local baseball field under his watch were consumed with guilt. Some neighbors refused interviews. Others broke down on camera, struggling to understand how a man like him could have hidden something so evil in plain sight. But one truth began to form: this was not a sudden snap or a breakdown. It was a long, calculated secret, a life built around darkness, disguised with everyday normality. And Thomas had almost gotten away with all of it. Almost. Thomas Elridge's arrest was quiet. No resistance, no shouting, no tears. He was led out of his house in handcuffs, eyes fixed on the pavement. News cameras captured the moment, but his expression never changed. At the station, he was booked, fingerprinted, and placed into a holding cell. He said nothing, not a single word. Detectives prepared for a long, difficult interrogation. They knew he might not speak at all. Serial offenders like Thomas often controlled the situation by staying silent. He had already shown a talent for staying hidden, for managing appearances. In many cases, that silence could last for months, sometimes years. But the investigators had something he didn't know about yet. During the analysis of the journal, detectives had found one entry that didn't match the pattern. It was short, just 2 initials and a date, but no ending, no comment, no drawing, no summary. It was different from the others. They began to suspect that this entry belonged to someone who had escaped. With help from federal databases, they located a woman named Lena Marsh. Now 28, Lena had once been a missing girl from a rough part of a nearby city. She had vanished in 2007 at the age of 10. Her case had been overlooked, blamed on family issues, but she hadn't vanished. She had been taken. Lena had escaped after only 2 nights. She never spoke publicly about it and never told anyone where she had been. Her relatives believed she had run away briefly before returning on her own. The trauma, however, had never left her. When investigators contacted her and shared the details of Thomas Elridge's arrest, something shifted. She broke down. She recognized the soundproofing, the mattress, the shape of the room. She remembered the smell, the freezer, the metal door that closed without a handle on the inside. It was the place she had seen in her nightmares for nearly 2 decades. For the first time, she gave a full statement. She described her abduction, the basement room, and how she had escaped through a vent when Thomas forgot to secure it. She had run barefoot through the woods, eventually reaching a gas station where a clerk called the police. She made up a story about being lost, and no one connected it to her brief disappearance. The truth had stayed buried inside her ever since. Detectives brought Lena's testimony to the interrogation room and placed a photo of her age 10 on the table in front of Thomas. That was the moment everything changed. He looked at the photo. His hands stopped moving. His face, for the first time, showed something real: recognition, not fear, not regret, just a flicker of disbelief. Then silence again. He leaned back slowly in the chair, stared at the wall, and whispered a single sentence under his breath, something no one in the room could hear. He never said another word after that. At trial, Lena's testimony became the turning point. With the journal, the forensic evidence, and the survivor's account, the jury needed only 2 hours to decide. Thomas Elridge was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And as the verdict was read, he sat motionless, eyes forward, still silent, knowing his secret was finally exposed.